All right, Sal, we tasked you with coming up with a secret list of 3 guys that do have you a little bit panicked heading into this season. Because look, sometimes the people, they're just in their feelings. And look, we love you, okay? Listeners, fantasy community, life is too short for that kind of panic, okay? Life is too short to be panicked about Jahmyr Gibbs with David Montgomery. But Sal, sometimes there are situations that really have us worried. And as a smart guy, you're going to tell us those 3 that we really need to care about here. So give me number 1 on your list.
Yeah, I'm going to be vulnerable here with you, Matt, so I appreciate it. I trust you on these. The first one is Christian Kirk, who is somebody that early on in the summer I was drafting a lot of as usually a 7th-round pick, and he kind of goes in a similar range right now. But I think things maybe haven't totally worked against him, but there's just these small things popping up that are giving me some concern. The biggest one is Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas was not having maybe the most outstanding beginning of camp, but the last 2 to 3 weeks, it's really come on, and it's come on strong. And when you start to say how he fits into this offense, it looks good. You see Evan Ingram in the preseason having 2 touchdowns, continuing to look good with Trevor Lawrence, led all tight ends in targets and receptions kind of quietly last season. So those are 2 weapons already in the offense. And now I'm starting to wonder if Brian Thomas is winning in the deep to intermediate parts of the field, if Ingram's controlling that middle part of the field. Obviously, there's going to be some work for Christian Kirk, but is it as much as I once thought 4 to 6 to 8 weeks ago? This is where some concerns come in. You could look at that first preseason game when Kirk wasn't on the field in 2 wide receiver sets. It's just 5 to 10 snaps. You can't take too much from that. They might have just wanted to see a formation with the rookie on the outside, how it works. But it's something that happened that's also, I'm already a little concerned. Then I see that, now I'm getting a little scared.
Yeah, we are publishing our wide receiver fades piece on the site. It will be up today as people are listening to this. And mine was Christian Kirk. So we're actually on the same page with this one. Look, Christian Kirk goes as like 70th overall player. You draft Christian Kirk and it doesn't work out. It's not going to sink your whole fantasy season. So maybe a cowardly call by me to make him my wide receiver fade, but he's just a guy that I've been drafting around, and in an area where I think you really got to get those receiver picks right. He is a guy that goes in a range that I'm not really trying to take a player with his path to upside, because I think there are some pretty serious blocks in terms of his path to upside. You laid out Brian Thomas is the biggest one. Again, to go back to the episode that we taped early this week with Dwayne McFarland, I said, and of course the social media team posted it, shout out to them, I'd rather have Brian Thomas straight up at this point over Christian Kirk. I think by the end of the season, he will be the number 1 receiver on this team. Evan Ingram's role overlaps a little bit with Kirk. I think Kirk is a good player, but he's a slot mostly guy. And we haven't said the name Gabe Davis yet, Sal, and because Gabe Davis is not a target earner, but he's a snap eater. He is going to be on the field pretty much for every single snap and doing his thing, which is mostly running vertical routes and not getting a lot of separation and not getting a lot of targets. But that still is going to impact everybody else in terms of their target ceilings in the offense. So I think Kirk can still be a decent wide receiver 3, maybe. But there's no real path to a ceiling there anymore, because I think Brian Thomas is kind of established himself enough to this point.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. The next guy that I have, though, is somebody who goes earlier. So, like, you get a 70th overall, like you were saying with Christian Kirk, it won't kill you. But this guy goes in round 3 in most drafts, and it's Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, maybe the most consistent player in NFL history, 10 straight seasons of 1,000+ yards. But he's now 31 years old, which, you should bring up in terms of when those wide receivers start to fall off. It's something to think about. And it seems like Chris Godwin's getting a little bit more involved in the offense in terms of being used in the right way. Liam Cohen this offseason has stated multiple times via Coach Speak Index on Twitter that, they're going to put Chris Godwin back in the slot. We saw that in a very limited sample of 7 snaps in the preseason. He was in the slot for 6 of those, where he's been more efficient, especially as an aging receiver. So does he start to earn more targets from Baker Mayfield? Baker Mayfield in general got paid $100 million this offseason. He was not in a prove-it year anymore. He proved it, and he got a bag. So how does he come into this season now? We'll see what happens there. And there's a brand new coach, of course, in terms of offensive coordinator, Dave Canales being gone with Liam Cohen coming in. How does that work in terms of how you're using the receivers? Canales was using them in a very specific way, helping Baker Mayfield's strengths. We're hoping that continues, but it's not just guaranteed to be carbon copied over.
Oh, this one's tough, man. my super basic analysis on this, which is not how I really feel. It just feels like I never quite get the Mike Evans, Chris Godwin thing right in terms of like which is the right year to be on, because both of these guys are really good players. And at times I actually think before Chris Godwin tore his ACL, I thought there was a very narrow gap between those two guys. Like I thought Godwin was really rising up to be, kind of in that. I think he's topped out as maybe being one of the best of the best number 2 receivers, but he was certainly creeping up on Evans in terms of like his overall rankings among the league's pantheon of wide receivers. But these last few years, it's been, I thought Godwin might be a better fit with Baker Mayfield than Mike Evans was, but the way they used him wasn't totally right. The way that, Mike Evans was just deployed on all these outbreaking routes, which is what Baker Mayfield loves to throw. He doesn't love to work the middle of the field. He loves to throw those outbreaking routes to the field because that's just where he's more comfortable working because of how tall he is and just the way he plays the position. So how much of that is going to map over from Dave Canales' offense to Liam Cohen's offense? How much is Cohen going to come in here and just say, hey, what worked with last year works for me? Jalen McMillan is also a guy who's been getting hype. That's certainly a part to point of this too, the rookie wide receiver. But at the same time, Sal, the only reason I can't get fully on board with you about panicking about Mike Evans is last year Evans saw 136 targets. Chris Godwin saw 130. Nobody else saw more than 70. I think that's maybe Jalen McMillan can establish himself to be like a 75 target receiver, something like that. But I think that would be a little bit of a stretch just based on how I view him as a player. So like in terms of just the overall volume in the offense, I think there's still more than enough for Evans to at least maybe meet his ADP, maybe not crush it. Because for Godwin, we're just asking him to score a few more touchdowns. Like we don't need him to see more than 130 targets to be a value at his respective ADP. So I'm not panicked on Mike Evans. I think he's okay as a 3rd round pick, but I do hear some of your points of concern on this one.
Thank you. You've calmed my nerves a good amount. I feel good now. And to add an extra bonus, the offensive line should be improved, adding Graham Barton, which should only help things.
Yeah, and their 2nd round pick last year, Cody Mock, I think should just be more equipped to handle the NFL. Like he was a guy coming from a small school last year, day 2 draft pick, like rookie offensive lineman could really struggle. They got great play out of Luke Kadecki. Tristan Wirfs is one of the best left tackles in the league now at this point. I think that improvement on the offensive line is actually the most important note here that could help the run game, but also could help the pass game too. Like a guy like Baker Mayfield, every quarterback is worse under pressure than they are when they're kept clean. But for Baker, he's always been a guy that when you can protect him, you're going to get the best out of him. So that's a good thing to note here too. All right, give me your last one, Sal. Let's go. Let's hear the last player that you're panicked on. Hopefully this one you finish with a bang.
Yeah, so the last one is actually one that a listener had earlier, so we're sharing some concerns here, and it is Jonathon Brooks, the Panthers running back, 2nd round pick. It's not a concern around the recent news. Like I said, we've kind of already known that he's going to miss a couple of weeks. Like that's something I already knew. Okay, he's going to miss an extra game. There is that chance that it's more, but we're going to assume we get him back for week 5. It's more so the concern now that Chuba Hubbard has that first 4 weeks to potentially, in some good matchups, look good, which maybe takes until now like week 7 or 8 instead of right away week 5 when Jonathon Brooks starts to take over. It at least increases the risk of a timeshare for a little bit more, which is not really what I want when I'm spending a draft pick on him. The nice thing is he seems to, at least in live drafts right now, be falling a round or 2. But that is where my concerns come in right now, especially in a lot of drafts earlier this summer if you were spending like that 8th round pick on him.
How could you think the Panthers offense is going to be this year? Like that I think is a big question to this. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to speak for you, Sal. I think that they're going to be better than they were last year, which is not saying very much, but how high do you think this offense can fly this year?
Yeah, if they get near league average, I think that's a massive win for them. They've done everything they possibly could have in terms of supporting Bryce Young. I think the offensive line might be the 2nd most improved unit behind the Jets heading into this year, which should help everybody around them. They brought in some pieces as well. Obviously, Deontay Johnson, 1st round pick. Xavier Legette, been banged up in camp. Maybe starts to get going a little bit as the season starts. So, I mean, if they finish as the 20th, 18th offense in the NFL, I think that's a massive win after what they were last year, dead last in yards per play, just averaging like something putrid below like 5 yards per play. So anything above that is a win.
There's a couple of the reason I ask that is because I think the popular comparison for Jonathon Brooks in the optimistic case is, well, look at what Breece Hall did last year. I think there's a couple of the one good point for Jonathon Brooks here is that I think he's going to play in a better offense than what Breece Hall played in last year. Whatever Bryce Young is, whatever Dave Canales is, it will be better than Nate Hackett and friggin' Tim Boyle or Trevor Siemian or whatever. Okay, so that's just point one in Brooks' favor. The two things that I think are problematic for Jonathon Brooks is, one, whatever Jonathon Brooks is, I think he's probably not going to be as good as Breece Hall. Panthers fans can feel free to be optimistic about Jonathon Brooks and like, hey, I'm an idiot and maybe I look like an idiot. Maybe Jonathon Brooks is the best back in the league, but Breece Hall is one of the best running backs in the league. So I don't necessarily think there's a lot of competition there. But your point about Chuba Hubbard, which, oh my God, this must be the most any podcast has freaking talked about Chuba Hubbard in the last few weeks. I think Chuba Hubbard is better than whatever 2023 Dalvin Cook was, right? If we're still using this Breece Hall comparison. So the thing I think that if you're panicking about Brooks, you've really got to believe that Chuba Hubbard is good enough to hold down a 1B-ish, or maybe even just the straight up, I don't think he'll end up holding the top job, but just be like a real member of a committee with Jonathon Brooks. Because if you're drafting Brooks, you're hoping he comes back and he's just a set it and forget it running back for you. If he's a guy that's in a murky committee on an offense that's at best 18th, 20th, I think that's where some of the panic comes in. I just don't know if I totally feel that way about Chuba Hubbard, Sal, but that's sort of the crux. Somehow that's the crux of this discussion here, is how good is Chuba Hubbard?
Yeah, and it could obviously go either way. Hubbard can absolutely stink those first couple of games, and they have to get Miles Sanders involved, and that's just looking ugly, right. And they can't wait to get Jonathon Brooks back. But it just it opens the door now for that chance of maybe a longer committee, because even when Brooks comes back, he's not seeing a full workload week 5 if that's when he comes back. They're probably going to give him a week or two to just ramp up back from the injury first games in the NFL.